What up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode. We're going to be talking about the possibilities now that Amazon has full control of Bond and what they should do with this IP. We talked a little bit about what can possibly happen with Amazon now bombarding us with Bond stuff. But we're going to talk about the possibilities of what they should be doing. What are the approaches that they should take? And if it fails, what are the pitfalls for some of these actions that they might be taking with Bond now that they have full control? Brian, I'm interested in hearing your thoughts. I have my one idea.
Okay.
Because having too many ideas, you're not going to just, I have one idea that I think would work, but what is yours?
Well, I wanted to ask you a little bit about structure first.
Okay.
Because so they have creative control as a studio, but we have all these models out there right now for how different studios have handled big IP. So I'll be curious as your thoughts for James Bond. What is the right organizational structure for that character? So to give you a couple examples, we have the James Gunn and Peter Safran. You have like a creative and you have a producer shepherding DC projects for Warner Brothers. You have, Kevin Feige, but also the Parliament, right? So you have this like single head, but then you have like the oligarchs in the room making their decisions to shepherd Marvel. You have Kathleen Kennedy, right? A sole producing head of Star Wars. And then you could also kind of do it without a head. Like, the Sony model with regard to Spider-Man was there was never like a Sony comic book specific Spider-Man person. It was just Sony Studios. And then we have the rights to this character. Amy Pascal wound up being like the default producer for Spider-Man movies, but it's not like Amy Pascal sat there and ran everything Spider-Man for a decade. If you're Amazon and you now have this character to do with what you want, what do you want as the leadership for Bond going forward?
I mean, in the past, it's always been the Broccoli family and whoever was doing the movie, correct?
Yeah, it was Barbara Broccoli and Michael Wilson. That was the two. And before Barbara Broccoli, I think it was Albert Broccoli, I think was her dad. That was sort of the predecessor. And then you're right. Then they would treat each project as a one-off other than the lead, who obviously was Connery, then more so they had that very regimented structure.
You would have to go through a really strong interviewing process to see where whomever were to take the role of taking this IP and making it as big or bigger than it has differently, because I don't know if they'll look to now that they have full control. I don't know they'll keep to the one movie per however many years that they
it's like every 5 years basically. Yeah
So they're not going to do that, but you would certainly find an experienced producer, someone who is experienced in the sense of big budget type films,
right,
with a lot of moving parts in terms of traveling and however you want to think about it as far as size of production. So you would probably need somebody who's experienced with that and have a team, because I don't know if, again, they're not going to do this one movie and then release every 5 years. They're going to build a world, I think, around this. But yeah, it should be a special unit for the Bond franchise, just like Kevin has it for the MCU, just like Kathleen has it for Star Wars, and so on and so forth.
I think for Bond, I like the Kevin plus Parliament structure the best. There's something about this particular character, especially because I think it is a challenge to expand it. We saw with Star Wars expanding that too quickly ended in disaster. We saw with Marvel up to a point you could expand it and it was fine. And then they wound up going too far in the Disney Plus era. But like up to a point, like we saw they could put out 3 movies a year, 3 good movies a year, and everyone was fine with that. And then have some, you could have some animation here, or they could do some stuff. But I just feel like for this character, if you just have one person at the controls, I don't know that there is the one person out there that I trust to have a good handle on how to bring all of that to fruition. Whereas if I feel like you have like a head, but then he or she has 5 deputies, and maybe some of those are connected to, have experience in making spycraft stuff for movies or TV, or maybe it's somebody who has connections to Bond in the past in some capacity, like who wrote or worked on a couple of films. Like, I don't know. I think that would help quality control what you're putting out, because I think it's going to be an adjustment for people to have like Bond TV and Bond movie, and then I know we've had GoldenEye the video game, but like you might have like more Bond toys, you might have like a Bond ride somewhere. Like I don't know, like there's a lot there, but like I don't know if people are like ready to be inundated with Bond the way Amazon is likely to do it.
I would definitely be poaching certain projects that have lent itself to the thought of this looks like Bond. For example, The Day of the Jackal. That show for me is just oozes a lot of visually, I would say, what Bond would look like for me, and just how that production.
So like to that point, I thought one of the people they could ask to be a consultant to be a part of this was Mick Herron, who actually writes the books on which Slow Horses is based, just because you have a guy who's writing best-selling novels in British spycraft today, and you can't really use Sir Ian Fleming himself, obviously. So like having someone who's steeped in the genre might be a good just voice to have in the room of like, yeah, that would work. That would work for a British spy. That wouldn't, that kind of thing. I'd like to see them make a committee for this. And I'd like to see them not rubber stamp every freaking idea that comes their way, because I do think there's a way you can ruin this if you rush too much into production, which I'm worried they will do.
The idea that I had as far as expanding, let's say you have the people in place and you want to move forward with telling a Bond movie, but you want to, again, this is my experimentation with the world, is a TV series that starts and leads up to an incident where, similar to the Penguin, what happened at the end of Penguin? You see the bat signal. Now we're going into that story with him. I think that same approach can be taken from the perspective of Q and with the gadgets. He has to provide the gadgets to these double O's or whatever the case may be. A guy inspector number 2, I don't know, somebody from his perspective and what they're trying to do.
Yep. I had something like that on my list. Yeah.
So there's ways to build the world without having Bond, but you can have other agents, and they may not make it at the end of the series. You know what I'm saying? Hence, Bond takes over, and there's your movie.
We'll get back to the movies in a second. I think you hit on, they have danced around this idea of the other double O's on a couple of occasions. So if you remember in GoldenEye, Sean Bean, who breaks bad, is a double O. He starts out as one of the other double O's. Lashana Lynch is 007 in title when Daniel Craig kind of quasi-retires and then kind of comes back. I actually think there's a decent chance Amazon goes for an Avengers-style build-up with multiple double O's and uses the streaming service. Right? It makes 007 their big screen guy. But tonally, what I would do is you bring in different creators to basically create 003, 008. That's also
and
your
all these
way.
double O's are different. They're not
Exactly.
Bond.
This is also your way to solve the representation problem in Bond, because now you're not bound by the legacy of James Bond himself. You can credibly have a roster which has different genders and has different ethnicities, and people who got into the spy craft and got into MI6 in different ways. And like I said, as long as you have like different creators who are kind of almost giving a different tone to the characters have their own personality, but you're kind of leaving little clues and Easter eggs, which lead to the one adventure on which you need all of them with 007 at the head. I would be shocked if Amazon doesn't try something along those lines.
I'd call the show Double O.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, Licenses to Kill. I don't know. I mean, it's just like it makes too much sense, and I feel like it avoids the issue of like Bond himself being overexposed, which you definitely want to be wary of. So I think that was one. I think the other one, which makes perfect sense to me, is like 00 Academy, like something kind of like younger agents training to get in the field, like something like almost like Kingsman was, where like they got those like kids together and they auditioned to get the role. Would be pretty surprised if we don't see that. I thought the Spectre idea makes a ton of sense. Like we see the villain thing tried all the time. Like they're going to try it from the villain's perspective somehow, right?
Yeah.
And yet have the villain win or kind of get away or something like that. I think that makes too much sense to do. You obviously also have, I think, you're going to see spin-off attempts. I don't know, like Felix is sitting there as a character. M is sitting there as a character. Like you've got other ones you can do if you want to. Q maybe even if you want to do. I would be pretty surprised if we don't see at least one of those tried, whether that's as a streaming movie. I think most of this stuff would not be on the big screen, though. I tend to think like Bond and the team up would be the thing that makes it to the actual big screen.
Yeah. But they'll be so bold enough to do a Moneypenny show. They'll do it. They'll do it.
They're also absolutely going to do an animated show too. Bond animated is absolutely coming. Yes.
They tried that before, right?
There was an attempt at it, but I think that one would actually have James Bond in it. I think it would be like actual 007 animated.
But separate, Elseworld type of situation, huh?
Yeah, and like obviously more appropriate for teens, or kind of like, Batman the Animated Series, probably level of maturity, but like actually has James Bond as a character in it.
You think it would work?
I don't know. It's a pretty adult. I mean, the themes that make Bond the chauvinist and the womanizer and stuff like that aren't really appropriate for kids. So if you dull that down or take it out, I don't really know if he's James Bond anymore. But
have you seen a spy animation show that reminded you of Bond and this could work? Have you seen anything like that?
I mean, it's not for me. I don't think it's quite the same, but I think actually the Netflix did a show based on Carmen Sandiego, the the computer game character, where they made her more of like this globe-trotting sort of detective / spy, opposite like the villains from the game. And so she wasn't the villain. She was actually the hero of the series, but like that kind of worked. Like that's a pretty good show. I don't know if it's not quite Bond, but it's sort of spy-ish, and it's appropriate for 10-year-olds, 9-year-olds. But the problem is, like I said, Carmen Sandiego doesn't come with the baggage that James Bond does, is like of the identifying characteristics. That to me is the challenge. And it's like, would they be willing to make an adult animated cartoon with Bond? That'd be interesting. I don't know if they'd try that, but
these are separate genres. But I like the style of the characters and the nature of the conversations. What comes to mind is, again, not the same genre, but in terms of conversations and adult maturity, I would say. Castlevania, the conversations that are had there, the fight scenes, even though some of them are a little bit too fantastical, but I'm like Blue-Eyed Samurai, the fight scenes are there, dope.
Yeah. But so you're talking about a TVMA type of cartoon. That's what you're talking about there. I mean, they could do. The question is, would they want to? But yeah.
Yeah, and I don't see why they wouldn't want to try that, because Bond to me is not a teenage type of character. This is more mature, where things that are said might go over some people's heads if they're not, I guess, mature to understand what he's referring to or whatever the case may be. But it doesn't have to be a TVMA with regards to language. I would say scenario more so, and violence.
Now, for the movies, would you stick with the general approach they've used with regard to the movies? And there's an interesting wrinkle, that story that came out this week regarding, a very famous director and James Bond. But like, they've obviously focused on, we cast the star, we bring generally a different director in most of the time. Like each movie, until Daniel Craig really wasn't serialized or connected. Like, what would you do now? Would you make them standalones? Would you connect them? Like, would you have the same director do more than one? Like, do it as like a trilogy? Like, how would you approach the big screen part of Bond now?
I think, me personally, this is what I would do. I'd be like, yo, Chris Nolan, you want to do your trilogy? You can do it the way you want to. We could do your trilogy, James Bond. What's up? I'd have that conversation first and see. But I would still lean towards getting Bond on the screen just to introduce a new Bond. And that would be Henry Cavill. I mean, there's no reason to not want to do that if he wants to do it. I would have that conversation first. Yo, Henry, do you want to do this? And if he says yes, yo, Chris, you want to do this? I got Henry with you. What's up?
So the story that came out this week was that Christopher Nolan, and this was has been rumored, but it was confirmed in Variety. After he made Tenet, which obviously was a spy craft movie that he basically subverted the genre, he reached out to Barbara Broccoli to direct a James Bond movie. And she said no, because Christopher Nolan gets final cut on all of his movies, and Barbara Broccoli had final cut on all the James Bond movies, and she would not give him the creative control to do a James Bond movie. Obviously, Amazon is not going to feel the same way. So the question is, out of the gate, right? So this is going to be your first Amazon banner James Bond movie. I mean, how are you not calling him back and saying, whatever you want to do, we'll do? Now, I disagree with one thing you said. I don't think Christopher Nolan would ever sign up for a James Bond movie where he didn't get to pick James Bond. Not saying he wouldn't pick Henry Cavill necessarily, but I don't think he would ever accept a project where the lead had been chosen for him.
So my approach then would be talking to Henry Cavill. Are you interested? Yes. Not signing anything. I would say, Chris, he's interested. Would you pick him? Do you want to work with him? Do you want to do a reading? I would always do a reading. Me personally, I would always want to sit down, do a reading. Let's see how this goes. You did that 20 years ago. I don't care about that. Let's do this now.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So I would have a very short list.
One of the biggest assets, I think, if you get Christopher Nolan to direct a James Bond movie, there's not a single actor and actress in Hollywood that will turn down whatever role he wants them to play. Look at his movies. I mean, his movies are there's like a line down the street of actors and actresses trying to get in, even for like a scene. Like, it's crazy when you watch some of his movies where you're like, you see an A-list actor in there for like 2 minutes, and you realize that they were desperate to just work with him for a day. So your advantage is that whoever he wants to be James Bond, as long as you're cool with it, that person is saying yes, because he's directing the movie. Now, your point about the trilogy is interesting, because he's only ever done one series, and that was obviously Batman. He's typically been a single and done genre type of director. I don't know what he would want to do in this. Would he want to do just one to leave his mark on the franchise, or would he actually want to build a serialized story with the same character? That's a question only he can answer. But yeah. I'm just thinking, if I'm Amazon and you need this first movie after you've taken over to work, you pay him whatever he asks, and you give him whatever he asks for. Because that, when we talk about the guaranteed $1 billion club, that is you're playing. I think you're playing for like 1.5. I think you're playing for a number much higher than $1 billion. If Christopher Nolan is directing your James Bond movie and it's like a new, sky's the limit. on that.
Yeah, that would be the approach. That would be the approach. Because right now, it's crazy to think that now you have the control that you've been wanting. That wasn't. I mean, the Broccoli family had the kung fu grip on James Bond. They didn't want to let go. Now you have complete control. So they're definitely not going to be sitting on this. They're definitely going to be moving forward very quickly on this. Who they get to do this will be interesting. But again, Henry Cavill's right there. And even Jeff Bezos put out a poll to find out from the audience whom they would want as James Bond. And Henry Cavill was number one.
Overwhelmingly.
I don't think anyone would not pay their ticket to go see that. I think that is a higher probability of success than anything else, I think.
Well, that's what I mean. If you did wind up lining up a Christopher Nolan directed, Henry Cavill led James Bond movie, I mean, that is an automatic $1 billion to $1.5 billion movie. Automatic. And as we said, because we always talk about Nolan visually, you will see something in that Bond movie you've never seen before.
The possibilities are there's nowhere to go but up, I think, with Bond.
They just need to be careful in metering it out. I know they want to do a lot. They just need to be, a little bit of patience will pay off bigger for them in the long run.
Yeah, I don't believe starting from jump, doing a TV series then into the movies. I don't think you do that. I think you really get Henry out there, make that $1 billion that thing, and then in between make the I guess the gap for the second film, and then another season, a gap for between the second and third film. You start that process. Yeah, you got to start over Bond, finding your Bond, and Henry Cavill, if he's willing to do so, would be the guy. If not, there are others. I like Michael Fassbender.
Black Bag, by the way, that looks really good. Black Bag, he's a spy married to Cate Blanchett, tasked with turning on her and killing her as part of his spy assignment. Steven Soderbergh, Ocean's 11, directing that movie, comes out next month. Looks really interesting.
In theaters?
Yes, March 14th.
Okay.
If you can't get Nolan, is it sacrilege to call Christopher McQuarrie now that Mission Impossible is wrapping up? Is that like a Star Wars, Star Trek thing? You can't do both?
It's difficult in that visually, you don't want it to feel like Mission Impossible.
No, but presumably Cruise is not there, so that I think you don't run the risk of that just because Cruise is so pervasive in sort of the style of those films that like it's just McQuarrie having the experience of big budget, spy genre, big action, and he's a good writer. Like, I don't know. It's just like one of those like thoughts I had of like, who else could you call if you can't get Nolan?
Yeah, if you can't get Nolan, because the guy is busy.
But you need it to work, right? You can't. This is not the time to be taking a chance on the up and coming indie filmmaker who has a nice pitch. Like,
this is certainly. I mean, you're gonna have to go. Obviously, some people don't need to interview Chris Nolan. But everybody else, you sort of got to sit down with them and have a conversation, and that's to give them give their pitch to you, or their idea of what a Bond universe looks like, or what their Bond looks like. So yeah, it's a good situation to be in because you're creating this new world. This new franchise, really, like this is on par with Star Wars. It's up there in terms of IP and what you can do with it if you do it. If you take the right steps. Obviously, this is something that that's never been attempted before with this character, and not in a way that with this level of control, right? This is what makes it a little bit, you gotta be very careful and not go crazy, because the tendency is to like, let's do it all. You know what I'm saying? That's the tendency, because you've been sitting on this, you paid billions, and still nothing. You have nothing, and the urgency to get something out there to sort of try to recoup that is there, obviously, but you gotta make the right decisions, and starting off with Chris Nolan, and then working your way down with people who are capable of doing that have experience with big budgets, as you say, with like Chris McQuarrie.
That list is not long.
Yeah,
like, sit down and think about it, right? Think about the directors who you're like, I feel confident based on existing track record, they can deliver an elevated blockbuster involving a super spy. That list is short. It is. Like, I was trying to think about it the other day of like, who is actually on that list of like, if they wanted the job, would almost certainly get it. There's not that many people.
There's not that many people, no, but I would certainly get the people. Again, I'm going to refer to it again because every time I watched the opening sequence of this show, it reminded me of Bond, and that was the Day of the Jackal. The people there, the directors that directed episodes, I would have conversations with them.
It's a big leap, though, to do a movie. It's a big leap. That's what I'm saying. That's you're taking somewhat of a chance. I'm saying existing movie directors, there aren't that many. And even some of the ones who are very successful in what they do, I'm not sure if it translates to James Bond.
Yeah, this is definitely very interesting as to what's going to happen next with this IP. Very interesting. Because we already have two IPs that were on a pedestal. Now people are seemingly forgetting about them or having no interest in them.
I think people are scared by this move. I think the reaction to this development was by and large concern, not excitement.
With Bond?
Yes. The idea that Amazon taking over was a bad sign because people are afraid of the oversaturation and they're afraid of the quality degradation just because Amazon is going to want to rush more of the IP into the market. That's most of what I've read. I have not read many people who are like, this is a slam dunk home run for everyone who's a fan of this character. So that's why I say Amazon's got to win the PR battle with some big consensus favorable announcements, right? Like I said, you announce Christopher Nolan as the director of your first Bond movie, and he says, I'm good, and Henry Cavill's my guy. Like, a lot of those complaints go away in a second.
Immediately.
You start announcing 5 different TV shows alongside, like, people gonna start doubting. Like, that's the trick.
Yeah, I think if they start off with that sort of ambition, it's definitely going to get people concerned about it. With that ambition of starting this whole big universe, I'm still for, give me a Bond film, give me a Bond movie, introduce that Bond guy, do a fantastic movie, and then dive into the world that sets up the next movie. I would play with that because it's not like Amazon doesn't have the money or the resources to get something like that off and running. So, yeah, I understand the concern, but who's doing He-Man? First of all, who's doing He-Man?
Travis Knight?
No, but what's out of? It's
Amazon.
Out of, is
no Amazon.
So me thinking about He-Man and the
that
names,
picture was great, by the way. Did you see that? I sent it to you. That's the sword, man. That looks like the sword he's holding.
But here's what I'm saying. Amazon, I think, or the people over at Amazon, whomever they got there working, doing their studio stuff, the level of seriousness that they're taking this movie, possibly, the names that are attached to it, this looks like high quality stuff. And I think with Bond, there is a measure of sophistication, elegance. These are the words, adjectives that I have with Bond. And charisma, that they know the ingredients. They just got to be able to cook it. I don't know. And we don't know if they can, but it's obviously getting the chefs to do it. The Nolans, possibly the McQuarries, and a new chef. I don't know. but there's certain steps that need to be taken in order for them not in order for us not to go or get too concerned with their anxiousness of getting something out. You want to do some odds and ends?
Yeah, let's do a couple odds and ends.
So let's get into some tidbits here. There was a trailer that I just recently saw that Brian put me on to. When I saw Havoc, I'm like, they're doing X-Men already? No, this is another film starring Tom Hardy, and there was some other names that I saw in the trailer that I found. Yes, who's always good. So that movie looks interesting, and that is a Netflix movie, correct?
Yeah, coming April 25th.
Is that coming out in the theaters or just on Netflix?
Streamer only.
Interesting. What did you think of that trailer when you saw it?
So the biggest thing for me is it's directed by Gareth Evans, who directed The Raid. And if you look at the action sequence, there's a couple camera shots where you're just like, this is why this guy is good at this. There's a shot where the camera looks like it's attached to a shotgun, looking at the barrel of the shotgun, and it like shoots a cop like sitting in the car. That's the kind of stuff that like he did in The Raid that changed sort of how you looked at sort of action staging and sequencing. There's another shot with like a pipe. Like there's a guy like it looks like Hardy's using a pipe on some bad guys at close quarters. Like I just find his work interesting within action. It's always like, it's just like he comes up with stuff that I haven't thought of, even though it's very frenetic. It's very violent. And I'm telling you, man, like I think the movie will be just like visually fun to watch, but like I saw that trailer and I've said it before, but like Marvel missed it. That was the guy to direct Blade. That's it. Because I just would wanted to see what he would have done with the vampire and the martial arts and like how he would have done the Daywalker effect. Like it's just that approach and that mood that 60-second trailer sets about like, this is Tom Hardy like fighting through the underground of London as a cop. I'm like, I don't know. It just made me regret even more what's happened to the Blade project, that they didn't talk to him about this.
They didn't talk to him because they don't care, Brian.
No, that's not the priority. Great action is not the priority. Yeah.
It's not on the list. It's not on the list. I'm telling you, that Blade, that Mahershala Ali phone call was out of nowhere, and Kevin just said yes and forgot about it. And it was never really a thing. And I still don't know why Ali's name is still attached to that. Another piece of news, which I found interesting, with regards to Jon Bernthal and The Punisher. When they first did Daredevil Season 2 and Punisher was a part of it, I think before it even ended, there was already talks of Jon Bernthal's Punisher, a season for his character. And now, sort of the same thing has happened, but not necessarily a season, but a special
like Werewolf by Night. Yeah, yes, like Werewolf by Night. Yep. Yeah.
And as well, I'll say this, that Jon Bernthal is apparently writing some of this as well, correct?
Correct.
So whatever they saw in this performance in Daredevil season 4, let's call it.
Okay.
Obviously, I think this was certainly pitched during, and they was like, let's do it. Let's just do it, right? I'm pretty. Jon Bernthal has an affinity for this character and understand what this character needs in order for it to work. And I'm excited for it. What did you think when you heard this?
Yeah, his portrayal is brutal and it's rough and it's very raw, and he's passionate about it, and I have no problem with them using. I thought, like I said, Werewolf by Night was an R-rated special presentation. I thought it's one of the more effective things Marvel has done in the last few years. I'd be very interested to see a Punisher special, and if he wants to be involved in the creative process, I think he's earned the right to do that. So no, I thought it was interesting that they just wanted to go in that direction with this particular character, but I'm all for it. Like I'll definitely watch it, and I'm excited to see where he's at in this season of Daredevil. So
I liked Punisher season 2 more than I did 1. In season 2, the conversations about the characters was a little bit deeper. I think there was a conversation between, I don't know if it was Karen Page or somebody else, that they were talking about the characters of Frank Castle and the other guy. And I just found that conversation about why they think they do what they do and who they are was fascinating to me.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and so far the first reactions for Daredevil season 4 or Born Again are good, like really good. Have you heard anything?
Yeah, same. Like I said, my biggest concern is just that like the one quote they had about putting much greater emphasis on action and less emphasis on conversation. That's probably my only concern. And then do we see an actual evolution of an already great show? But so far, people do seem to be reacting as if it's pretty darn good. So,
and they've already greenlit a season 2.
Well, yes, but remember the original plan was they had 18 episodes, and then they basically cut it in half. So there was kind of always going to be a season 2.
Got it.
It's really just the second 9 episodes of the original plan. But then obviously the show got scrapped and redone and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, no, we'll be talking about next show. We'll be talking about.
But yeah, when is that coming out? Next week, right?
Yeah, next Tuesday.
We just want to give a tribute to and talk about the career and life of Gene Hackman, who has been a part of many, many movies and has been praised for his performances. I didn't know he was that tall, 6'1", because in some movies he looks real tall. It just makes you think about how big Christopher Reeve was.
Yeah, he looks short as Lex Luthor. Yeah.
He looks tiny.
Yeah.
But Gene Hackman passed away recently. He was 95.
95, and had
lived
not
a long life. Yeah. Yes,
and had not. He retired from filmmaking in 2004. So he's not been active the last 20 plus years of his life. I think he said it was because he was diagnosed with some kind of not like heart condition, but like that his heart was under a lot of stress, and so he basically stepped away from acting. And he refused. There's been many attempts to get him to come back, and he has refused all of them.
Not even for an interview, right? He would come.
Yes, he lived in New Mexico, but he was part of you would see him like on the streets apparently of like Santa Fe or whatever, but occasionally. But yeah, 95.
Yeah. But yeah, tribute to him, to the work that he left behind in a lot of the characters that he played. Most memorable, obviously, to me is Superman. Even though his Lex Luthor wasn't a Lex Luthor I was used to seeing, his Lex Luthor was entertaining nonetheless and memorable in both Superman 1 and 2. And other films that I Get Shorty for me was one of my favorite films.
Okay. Yeah, I believe that.
That's one film that when I see it on, I watch it. And his performance, the one thing that I laugh about when Bette Midler shows up I think it's Bette Midler, that shows up at his apartment, and he's like, "Who is it?" And she says who it is, and he gives his reaction to knowing who it is just hilarious to me. But he was always, his reaction and acting was always believable. And I think that's what made him as great as he was. Any memorable performances that you hold dear, I guess, to you?
Yeah, I try to think of, obviously he is the original Lex Luthor on the big screen. Even though his performance is not vintage Lex, it is memorable. I think it's impossible to think of the Donner movie and not think of his part in it. And he actually, lest people forget, he is the top billed actor. Is that right? Or is Marlon Brando the top billed actor? He's billed ahead of Christopher Reeve. I think it's Brando, right? Brando's 1, Hackman's 2, and Christopher Reeve is 3 in the credit scroll. And I think of the roles that the role he won his first Oscar for, and I've seen The French Connection, is Papa Joe. That's not the one that like I grew up on though, because that movie predates my birth. So for me, if you said like who is Gene Hackman, it's really 3 roles plus an honor. It's, well, 3 roles plus the honorable mention, and Superman's actually the honorable mention. The 3 roles for me that I always think of is number 1, Norman Dale and Hoosiers. That's, for me, the one I've seen the most. Number 2 is Captain Frank Ramsey in Crimson Tide, because him opposite Denzel is incredible. That's one of the best, like, mano a mano, like, 2 guys at the height of their powers as actors. One is on the latter stage of his career and the other is on the rise, and I think that one I always think of. And then the third is Unforgiven, which he won his second Oscar as Sheriff Bill Daggett. The other one I actually just enjoy, even though I don't even think he's trying that hard. I actually really like him in Enemy of the State. I honestly think at that point he was kind of just on autopilot for a movie like that. Yeah. But it's really, it's no
Heartbreakers too.
Yeah, he did like The Replacement. He had this thing of like, Replacements behind enemy lines. He kind of became like, I should say, I'm not as big on The Firm as a movie, but I know that's one people like. He's the sleazy sort of head of that office. But for me, it's Dale, Crimson Tide, and it's Hoosiers, Crimson Tide, and Unforgiven. Those are the top 3 for me. And then like Superman, I remember, so that's obviously also before I was born. But then the honorable mention is Superman. So that's kind of the way I think. But like, he always looked the same for like 40 years. There's no such thing as a young Gene Hackman, and there's no such thing as an old Gene Hackman. He's just Gene Hackman. It's like I'm convinced he was born 45. So
right.
And there's something about that voice and delivery that he managed to make work in all these different roles. And it's like he's one of those rare actors where doing some of the same shtick, which sometimes gets really repetitive and boring, never got repetitive and boring when he was doing it.
It was his delivery.
Yeah.
Delivery, just the way he acted, it was just convincing every time.
There's also something about him I've seen from other actors, which I only they would know. He is an actor's actor. There's a lot of very famous A-listers who talk almost in awe of working with him, as if it was like working with some supernatural like force that doesn't really come through necessarily in the movies, but there must have been something about him on set that was just different, because everyone has said it, from like Will Smith to Costner to Denzel. They've all been like, who's like the guy you remember working with the most, and like Hackman always comes up as one of those guys. So I don't know what it is about him, but he had a special cachet, I think, in Hollywood.
It'll be interesting to hear the thoughts of people who have worked with him and what exactly made them, what instance that they recall when acting that they were like, oh, snap. You know what I'm saying? That would be an interesting conversation to have with actors who've worked with him. Yeah, let us know in the comment section below what you guys think of Havoc trailer, the Punisher special. I think did we get it? Yeah, we did get into Bond in this one as well. And let us know what you guys think of what should happen with Bond. That is a very interesting situation given the history of movies that have been made under one umbrella now has changed and now could be slightly different. How different? That is the concern. That is the concern, and how much of it. So yeah, let us know in the comment section below what you guys think. Hit that like and subscribe. Hit that notification bell. We don't post a lot, but this week we're going to probably post quite a bit because we spoke about a lot. But yeah, hit that like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on the Nerd Gen Report.